Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Jane's DC. I have another wonderful guest tonight. We're in store for an incredible conversation. Let me introduce our guest. Rick Manning is the president of Americans for Limited Government. A longtime public affairs professional, Rick served as the public affairs chief of staff at the U.S. Department of Labor during the George W. Bush administration, where he was twice recognized by the Secretary for Exceptional Achievement. This past week, in fact, Rick was a recipient of the prestigious Impact Award from United in Purpose, recognizing those making a major difference in driving conservative principles in politics. I'm really thrilled to welcome Rick tonight to the show. Rick, good evening, and thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jane.
This is wonderful. We have some really hot topics to discuss tonight. But before we get started, I want our viewers to learn a little bit more about your organization. It's called Americans for Limited Government. Tell us how it got started, what are you about, and how can people get involved if they're interested?
Well, Americans for Limited Government was started about 10 years ago. One of the founders, in fact, was Senator Tom Coburn. And the objective is to do just what it sounds like, is to try to limit the size and scope of government. During the Obama years, that seemed like almost an impossible task. But we've really been focusing on encouraging Congress to use their Article I responsibilities to defund government rather than continuing to fund government. There's so many places where Congress can intervene, and they're really failing in many respects to do the things they could do to limit government and actually restore their rightful constitutional authority. President Trump today gave a great statement where he was talking about too many laws are written open-ended to let the administrative state take over. Congress needs to fix that. They need to change it. And I think we've got the right people in place to do that. And that's what we're fighting for every single day.
That's great to know. And that's one of the unique things about the president. He looks at it from he looks at everything from a practical end. I mean, he can't run the executive branch like a corporation, unfortunately, sometimes, but I think he gets it, and he does look for the practical and efficient ways to modify government. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, his statement today was brilliant, because what he effectively did is he cut to the kernel of the entire problem, and that is that Congress writes open-ended laws that then allows an EPA 30 years later to decide that carbon dioxide is a pollutant. And as a result, because of the open-endedness of the law, the courts look at it and say, yeah, that's what Congress allowed. Congress needs to be more precise with what they do. And very few politicians would say that because they were culpable. President Trump can look at it because he's not a politician and say, here's where the problem is. Congress, write laws that are precise. Don't give the administrative state wiggle room. And he's exactly right. Congress should make the tough decisions and not let others do that. And that's what we've been pushing for a long time. So it's just such a breath of fresh air to hear the President of the United States say that.
Absolutely. Well, Rick, I'd love to just dive in. I think the big topic that I really want to get into with you tonight, because I've been reading some of your articles on ALG.
Yeah.
And I'm just fascinated. And I think you take a really strong stand in some areas, but particularly tonight, I want to talk about the whole Mueller investigation. Now, from the aspect of, you used a term in one of your articles recently that I loved. You said, you talked about the politically weaponized FBI. I think we're all upset at what we're seeing. These foxes are guarding multiple hen houses. It's becoming a mess. I mean, everybody is implicated. Mueller, McCabe, Rosenstein. Tell us what you've discovered and what you've been writing about.
Well, I think this is as bad as anything I could have imagined. In fact, it's worse than anything I could have imagined. One of the things that we've always kind of taken at face value is that our intelligence services and that our FBI were not going to train their resources on trying to preempt the political process or engage in active attempts to change the results of elections. And yet it appears, based upon everything we know now, we had an FBI and a Department of Justice, at least some people within the FBI and the Department of Justice at the highest levels, who are actively seeking to undo the election, and in fact may have been actively seeking to change the results beforehand and then change the results afterwards. It is absolutely inconceivable that this could occur, But the more we learn, the more it appears that that's exactly what happened. And this is so untenable. It's so unbelievable that I don't think our country's ever faced a crisis quite like it.
Well, from what we're seeing right now, I'm actually stunned that President Trump was able to overcome it. The level of corruption, the level of collusion, just it baffles my mind that his process. I could get philosophical and religious about it and say that God's hand was on it, But for the most part, the practical issue that he had to overcome all this corruption and collusion. And a media across the Democratic media complex. How do you think he was able to do that, given everything we're now seeing and uncovering?
Twitter. Very simply, Twitter. He was able to directly talk to people. He was able to get his message. He didn't have to rely on other people to give his message for him and be a filter. He was able to go directly to the voters. And the voters said, I've had enough of what's going on in Washington, D.C. I need somebody who's going to tell me what the truth is. And Donald Trump did that. And I think that was ultimately his saving grace, was the fact that he had a capacity to get past the filter of the media and go directly to voters. And those voters had already been primed to reject the media because of everything that had been done in terms of the past 8 years, where effectively everything had been covered up in terms of things that were happening. And it was basically they turned into cheerleaders for the Obama administration.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I hear people saying, complaining or making statements around the president tweeting, and I don't want him to stop, because that was the only conduit we had, and that he had to communicate with us. And we can kind of tell, even if other people are tweeting with him or for him, we can kind of tell when he is tweeting, because there's a certain, there's just a certain boldness about his tweets.
He has an edge. He definitely has an edge. And the great part about it is, and trust me, I cringe sometimes. I really like the Trump presidency, but sometimes I cringe just like everybody else. But you know what? He sets the agenda every single day of what the media is going to talk about based on his tweets. If he doesn't want to talk about something that they want to talk about, he changes the subject. And he does so in such a way where they have to take the bait and they chase after what he wants to talk about. And that's how come we ended up talking about the NFL in such a meaningful way. And it really has created in so many different ways a real culture battle in this country. But it's not a culture battle where the conservative side is sitting back passively. For the first time, there's somebody who's leading that battle and standing up for what has been traditionally accepted as being the mainstream, is standing up and fighting for that mainstream. And they're using it from Twitter from 1600. And that's driving the left crazy. So God bless him. Tweet away.
In fact, I'd like to see him up the social media game. But I want to shift back over relative to this investigation, the Mueller investigation. You wrote about Fusion GPS paying reporters. So not only do we have the arms of the media creating information and then trying to peddle it, or narratives, and then peddling it as news, we now have a press that, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, beyond, the president calls them fake, I'm going to call them, they're basically media prostitutes. When somebody like Fusion GPS can pay reporters to pump out different types of narratives that may or may not be true, our U.S. press is not only deceptive, fake, but it's also it's owned. It's owned like a prostitute to the highest bidder. What do you think of? I mean, you wrote about that, about Fusion GPS. Tell us more about what you're thinking along those lines.
Well, Fusion GPS, for the people who are watching who don't know, Fusion GPS was started by a guy named Glenn Simpson. Simpson was a Wall Street Journal reporter who brought in some other reporters into this organization. They were hired initially by Robert Singer, who's a big Republican donor, to do investigative work on Trump. When the president got the nomination, they went over and were hired by the Democratic National Committee and by Hillary Clinton, which are one and the same, to continue investigating President Trump. That's where the whole Michael Steele dossier came from, was out of Fusion GPS. We now know that Fusion GPS was heavily involved with contacts at the Justice Department. The number 4 person of the Justice Department just was demoted. He was literally 2 doors down from from Rosenstein's office. He was meeting with Fusion GPS. He had met with Christopher Steele, who wrote the dossier during the campaign. And what's worse, his wife, it now turns out, worked for Fusion GPS, and she's a Russian expert. So you have to guess that she was involved in the development of the dossier. Now, this is just a guess, hasn't been confirmed, but it'd be hard to imagine she wasn't. So then you get this fake dossier that's created, and then Fusion GPS is going out and selling it to reporters, and literally has reporters, according to reports, has reporters that are being paid to write stories that are based upon what is at best an opposition research document that has been given a stamp of approval by the FBI and the Department of Justice under Obama. And so now the reporters being paid to push this nonsense, and they're all doing it under the guise of being neutral. So they're getting on television, they're writing articles, they're commenting off of each other's articles, all as part of a concerted effort to take down Donald Trump's campaign. That's what it was about. What's worse, even than paying the reporters, is that those reporters went off and they deliberately sought to influence the election. They weren't they were essentially paid political operatives, not reporters. And it's one thing when a political consultant gets on TV and gives an opinion, you know they're a political consultant. A reporter gets on and they're being paid by one campaign, by a campaign to deliver news. They are a political operative, and they have lost all right to be on that air.
I totally agree with you. In fact, that brings us to my next question. I really want to get into this. Where is our Attorney General? You know, I created a meme on my Twitter and I pinned it, and it's a picture of a grandpa swinging asleep in a hammock, and I transposed Jeff Sessions' head on there. Now it sounds like that's a little harsh, but to be honest with you, you did write this week about the fact that he is doing some DOJ house cleaning, which I'm happy to hear. But this guy is nowhere. And where is he? Where is he in Uranium One, Benghazi, the Clinton Foundation? And I want to get to the exoneration writing and Peter Stroze's role. But before we do, could you just address your thoughts and what your information, the sources are telling you about?
Well, let me be clear. I'm friends with Jeff Sessions. Okay,
where is he?
And so, well, I'll tell you. The reason we know about Orr, the guy who was the assistant deputy AG, and his relationships is because of Jeff Sessions. The reason we're getting all those leaks, all those things that are coming out in terms of the emails and everything that's coming to Judicial Watch is because of Jeff Sessions. They are fighting tooth and nail inside the Department of Justice against the very swamp that they walked in there and discovered that it basically inundated the joint. They're fighting tooth and nail every single day to get the facts out on this. Jeff Sessions is, in fact, the reason we know that Orr got demoted. Jeff Sessions. I predict that before Christmas, we'll have some additional announcements in terms of personnel. I don't have any information to that. I'm not breaking news here. I just think that will be happening because we are right now. Jeff Sessions is in the position where he's identified some of the people who are the major problems, the people who've been obstructionists, who've actually been actively involved in this almost coup d'etat, and he's now taking action from everything I understand to try to relieve those people or get them out of the way. So it's right now we're in the thick of the action over there. We just don't see it because it hasn't gotten to the public domain yet. But I'm pretty confident that we're going to see some real changes. Yeah. What's more, and I will just explain this in a very simple way. Jeff Sessions is a methodical guy. He wants to get it right. If we're going to go after a former first lady, a former U.S. senator, a former candidate for president, losing candidate for president, and go after her from a legal perspective, we darn well better have our ducks in a row in terms of every single T crossed, I dotted, because if we don't, it will look like a political prosecution. Jeff Sessions is the guy who will make certain that if he actually violated the law on things like Uranium One,
Well,
that he will go after and try to extend the full extent of the law against her. And if she didn't violate the law because the law is insufficient, he will make recommendations on how to repair the law so it can never happen again.
well, I do appreciate your sticking up for your friend, and
Well, I'm also sticking up for what I think is right. So it has twofold, but that's.
I think maybe that the people around him or he could do a better job of communications in terms of communicating this to the American people, because from our perspective, we're getting frustrated. And I'm seeing some comments, which I'm going to share. A number of people, to your credit, have said to me, Jane, be patient. It's going to take time. But other people have said, it's been a year. He was a lot more aggressive verbally on the campaign trail. And I don't know about you, but to me, I understand that legally ducks have to be in a certain row. But people are frustrated because they're feeling like, how much more information or indictable information do you need from Hillary Clinton? We watched Trey Gowdy stretch these things out for months, for years now, and there have been no grand juries convened, no indictments, no prosecutorial movement at all. And I don't buy into the 3D chess thing. So we're done with all of that. So
I agree with you. I'm as impatient as anybody. We just got I guess in September. If I miss it by a month, I apologize. But in the last couple of months, we just got our U.S. Attorney for District of Columbia into place, who would be the person who could be carrying out some of these investigations and prosecutions.
Okay.
So unfortunately, it seems as though the people on the other side have absolute freewheeling ability to do whatever they want. They leak whatever they want. They tell their story and they create narratives. But that's not the way we want the law in the United States to work, where you prosecute somebody in the media, you create an environment where they can't possibly have a defense. You run them out of money because you have the unending funds of the U.S. government, and then you force them to do a plea deal, which is exactly what they did to Michael Flynn. So we don't want U.S. government doing that, because that's not the rule of law, and that is an innocent until proven guilty. And even Hillary Clinton deserves the presumption of innocence. And Jeff Sessions' job is to make certain that we don't just prosecute people, but that we make certain that they are in fact culpable in terms of the law for something they've done before the prosecution, and then go and let the courts take their case. Yeah. And that's what he's trying to do, and I'm confident in him in doing that. But once again, I am impatient. Patience is not one of my virtues. My wife had a poster on her wall when we were in college, and I subscribed to it entirely. There's a vulture standing over a guy in the desert who's still alive, and the poster said, "Patience, my ass, I'm going to kill something." Okay, so so I am an impatient individual. I get it.
Yeah, it can go to the extreme in either direction, and I just think we've had enough time. And I also feel, and I think a lot of other people are seeing in the comments, I'm seeing people say, so many of these people have committed crimes, or at least there's a lot of evidence. And I mean, and just getting back to the Mueller piece, here's a guy who helped practically walk a piece of, uranium over there to Russia. What is he doing in the first place? Why isn't he, how did he get there, and why isn't he being taken down?
Rod Rosenstein should be fired for having ever appointed Mueller, because Mueller was conflicted from the outset. He had to get an ethics waiver in order to be able to be the special counsel. And Rod Rosenstein knew it. Rod Rosenstein worked with Mueller on the Uranium One, and he should never have picked Mueller. Mueller is a tainted special prosecutor from the outset. The people he's put into place are all people who have been either Hillary supporters, Hillary sympathizers, people who attended her victory party or not so victory party. They are essentially a bunch of Hillary Clinton sycophants who never intended to look at the Hillary aspects of the election, the Hillary problems that existed during the election, and were completely focused on attempting to overturn the results of the election, to try to make the Russian narrative that the Clinton people had come up with to be true. What's worse is that many of them, since they were involved in the creation of the dossier, it appears as though they were actually covering up what was in fact their own Russian collusion to put dirt out on President Trump. And so the whole thing, the whole Mueller investigation is a scam, and Rod Rosenstein needs to shut it down now. And if Rod Rosenstein won't, he should be fired.
Totally agree. And while we're on the topic of obvious criminals, I would like you to address, if you could, and if you're interested in, Comey. Here's a guy who we know perjured himself more than once before Senate or House committees, and he's now dallying along. He started a nice little Twitter handle. He's frolicking through the fields. This guy should be investigated and indicted. Where is the legal movement? Again, I know I'm going back to AG Sessions because that's all I have. But
Yep.
Talk about Comey's role. Talk about him breaking the law, perjuring himself, and how he's just out there. This is a guy who orchestrated Hillary's exoneration, essentially. We now know that. And he's off dancing in the fields. What? Untouched.
He's doing better than untouched. He got a multi-million-dollar book advance to write a book about all this stuff. So he's doing better than dancing in the fields. He's dancing in the dollars. So he is actually probably one of the more difficult characters in this play. James Comey clearly is culpable. He clearly participated in whitewashing everything in terms of the email scandal. He's a guy who has a history of going after people and ruining their lives when they aren't guilty of anything. He's a guy who who is a friend of Mueller's, who actually set the whole thing in motion in terms of by leaking documents which weren't his to leak. They're FBI documents, his memos of meetings with the president. After saying under oath that he wasn't investigating President Trump to Congress, he then leaked memos and encouraged that the special prosecutor be appointed to investigate the president of the United States on Russian collusion. And so you're looking at a guy who has attempted to orchestrate this whole fiasco, and he cannot skate for that. He can't just skate for that.
He is. I don't know what we can do about it. And
we can do something about it. I mean, here's the thing. Once we get this thing's going to unwind. We're looking, if this were a football game, we're midway through the second quarter. Okay, it's going to unwind on them, and the boomerang effect is pretty severe. And as it unwinds, James Comey is going to find himself with a world of hurt, because he's going to be in a position of having an unfriendly U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia. He's going to find himself having to answer questions to Congress about why he lied. If Congress wants to, they can take a look at what he did, and they can determine that he lied to Congress and refer to the U.S. Attorney's Office to file charges for perjury against him. I mean, we had Roger Clemens being taken up on perjury charges over steroids. I mean, this is if they can take Roger Clemens up on steroids because they wanted him to say he used them when he didn't want to say he used them, at that juncture, James Comey was talking about something important and lying to Congress.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. And it underscores all the more how these people are getting away with it. Comey, everything, these crimes are committed in plain sight, and they just dance around, and there's no culpability. I hope what you're saying is true. I hope the unwinding will happen, but I think the American people are getting sick of waiting for the spool to completely unwind, when a lot could be done right now. A lot could be started, but we'll agree to sort of not disagree.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you. I am anxious to have this stuff done. I'm actually giving a course of action that on Comey and some of the people who've testified. If people want to talk to their members of Congress, Congress has a right to take Comey to court and find him in contempt. If Congress, if Trey Gowdy and Jim Jordan and all those guys are really concerned that Comey has lied to them, if they're really concerned that Hillary Clinton lied to them last year when she was under oath, if they believe those things to be true, which I believe them to be true, then they have a recourse that they can do by holding them in contempt and asking the U.S. attorney to bring charges and really jump-starting that aspect of the investigation without having any special counsel, just using the normal procedures that exist for dealing with people who lie to Congress.
Right. But my feeling is that they shouldn't, those members of Congress shouldn't need us to be telling them and pounding on the door. They should have been doing it by now. I mean, there's just so much. Well, anyway.
I agree. But you know as well as I do that the key thing for any member of Congress, they respond to YouTube hits. They respond to people knocking on their door. And, and one of the things that members of Congress, I'm not naming any names, and the people I've mentioned are not culpable here, but many members of Congress are really good at laying down some good YouTube tape and then not do anything about it. Sure. There is something they can do about this, and I would encourage them to do it.
And we're tired of them not doing anything. I'm just going to lend voice to that. I think it's time to shift a little bit over to the fake news.
Sure.
The fake news media. Steve Bannon has clarified for me, and I think a lot of other people, that the media in this country, it's not just that they're lying to us and that they're bought and paid for by the Democrat and the institutional left, but that they actually have a contempt for the American people. And nowhere was that more clear and resonant than what you wrote about in your December 8th article. I thought it was fascinating about the CNN fake article that then created this false narrative that Don Jr. was involved in a WikiLeaks situation. Tell us lay out that story for us. It was a brief article, but it was packed very powerfully. And
it's one of those things that you just sit there and you go, these guys are they're just out of control. Don Jr. received an email that gave him some publicly available documents. And CNN went off and reported that the email was received 10 days earlier than it was, making it and stating outright that he had been leaked these documents in advance in order to be able to run some kind of campaign. When in fact he got the documents, they were publicly available, and anybody could have gotten them, and somebody emailed them to him. So they created a major firestorm. They got ratings and eyeballs from everybody who's frothing at the mouth for Donald Trump to go to jail. So they accomplished their business need
hit job, right,
by getting hits, by having a hit job that was demonstrably false, and all somebody had to do was look at the dates, and they just failed to do so. It was such an egregious act of political news terrorism that it's almost hard to imagine that somebody could do it. CNN pretends to be a news agency, and they have lost all credibility and all capacity to do so. And it's astonishing to me that they aren't required to report themselves as a political organization, and because that's what they are. They're nothing more than hitting the talking points that whoever is sending them to from the left is sending to them, so others can quote them on the left as being a credible source who reported it. And Jane, this is what people need to understand. The way the left operates is they get a CNN or an MSNBC to report something that's dubious. Mm-hmm. And then every other left-wing outlet uses that as the catalyst to then report on it, and then they self-validate each other on the same basic fallacious argument. And it's something that a guy named Ben Rhodes set up in the Obama White House. It's how they sold the Iran treaty, and it's a self-fulfilling kind of self-congratulatory, circular firing squad where they all print the same junk, using the same bad source, but they're citing each other to provide legitimacy.
Exactly.
And it isn't news. It isn't the way journalism is supposed to be doing. And they need to go back to first principles, which is go to your primary sources, find out the facts for yourself, and then print, as opposed to relying on other people to have the primary sources, because other people's primary sources have turned out to be really bad.
Right. It's so true. And, you know, I'm reminded of C. Wright Mills, this book I read in college called The Power Elite, and how these interlocking directorates, they're all in collusion with each other. Mm-hmm. And when the Democrat media complex was coined, and I'm not sure if Andrew Breitbart coined that or not, but he used it a lot. It explains everything. And speaking of him, he talked about how damaging innuendo can be. The damage is done. You throw the crap at the wall, it sticks, and as it's dripping down and people are trying to clean it up because it's not true, the damage has already been done. Innuendo. And this is a really big tool that the left uses. I think that's essentially what you were describing. But here's my question. Sure. These are huge media conglomerates. Where is the accountability to the FCC? Why isn't our Federal Communication Commission going to these agents, going to these conglomerates and saying, whoa, you're misleading the public, you're affecting stock markets, you're causing riots in the street, you're actually probably, you know, Mike Cernovich is developing a movie called Hoaxed, The Media's War on Truth. And in the trailer that he talks about what this is not a joke. It's not just a matter of duping the American people. This is wreaking havoc across economies and social, you know, interconnectedness of people. It's causing a lot of damage. Why do we have we don't have an FCC that even opens an investigation and looks at the media complex? Are they bought and paid for too?
Well, I think the last 8 years they have been. I think this FCC we have right now, that Ajit Pai is an honest guy, and he'll take a look where a look needs to be taken. But you know, Jane, I'll tell you a story from like 1991, a long time ago. I was a lobbyist for National Rifle Association at the time. I live in Maryland. There was a handgun ban on the ballot in Maryland, and the Washington Post was running front page, like 3 or 4 stories every single day, front page against us, saying that we were lying in the ads that we were running, that everything we were putting out was a lie. And so the guy who was running the campaign, a guy named George Young, who I used to work for back in California, came and met with him. I wasn't in the meeting, but George was, and he presented all the facts behind the ads and said, "Here's the documentation. We're not lying. You can disagree with our outcome, with what we're saying, but you can't say we're lying, because we're not." And the ombudsman of the Washington Post at the time looked him in the eye and said, "You run your campaign, we'll run ours." So this isn't new. This is something we've always seen. And so any illusion that the media was ever a non-biased media is an illusion. What's different now is that there's alternatives, and there's people who are shining a light on it. So we have those alternatives like Fox News, like what you're doing on the air right now, who are shining a light on what's actually true, so people are able to find out different perspectives, different sets of facts, and not just the ones they're fed through what in the old days was 22 minutes from 6 to 6:30 through three networks. So the fact that we have so many diverse ways for people to find out what's true, to look at primary resources, to hear what somebody actually said versus what was reported they said, is one of the greatest breakthroughs in terms of breaking up this media complex. I will note that Jeff Sessions, his antitrust division, came down and expressed real concerns and is blocking the Time Warner AT&T merger. And CNN is part of Time Warner, and so they are blocking that and asking from reports that certain aspects of Time Warner be eliminated from that deal, including CNN. So yes, there are people who are paying attention. And once again, I don't want to overstate this, but there's a lot of things that the Attorney General does, and there's a lot of good things he does. So when we get frustrated, things aren't moving fast enough in some areas, understand there's a lot of things that are happening, and there's a lot of different balls in the air to take down this complex that's been built. And Jeff Sessions is right at the heart of getting that done.
All right, good to know. And, you know, along those lines, you made a really interesting point that's near and dear to my heart, the emergence of new media, what we call new media, through the social media platforms. And a pioneer like our leadership in this network, Cernovich Media, where Mike has created an environment where there is an alternative voice. And it just makes me wonder, you know, I know the president and the press secretary, who I met actually a couple of weeks ago, Sarah Sanders, and she's absolutely wonderful. I think she's doing a brilliant job. But I wonder, I want to shout out to them and say, cut that room in half and bring in new media correspondence. Give the new media a chance. If you want to see a balanced room, bring in new media and fill half the room. And when the fake news, the traditional mainstream media is in there, they're going to know that not everybody is going to collude and that night pump out stories and reports that are the same talking point, left-wing talking points. It's such an easy thing to do. I just wish the whole White House correspondence pool could be cut in half, and maybe they could draw straws and then fill in the new half with the new media.
I agree 100%. You know,
great?
President Obama had an interview with a woman who did the interview laying in a tub with milk and Cheerios. Okay. So, you know, it was, so any pretense that anything is off boundary for a president is, in terms of media interviews, is gone. President Obama killed that. So we've got so yes, they ought to be looking hard at putting in people with different outlets, different opportunities, different points of view, both left and right, to be able to have an opportunity to sit there and see for themselves. And the people, just because you sit there and you write for some newspaper that's been around for 100 years and has, you know, 100,000 subscribers or a circulation of 100, 200,000 people, doesn't mean you have a right to sit in a room. It's not a lifetime achievement award. It's you know, it's a matter of whether or not we're going to get the news out through as many variety of vehicles as possible. And I would agree with you 100%. I also agree with you. I think she's done a phenomenal job. I'm just, she is everything you could ask for in a press secretary. She doesn't take any grief from any of these guys. She gives it back just as much harder than she gets it. And you know what? It's really, really, it's exposing them for who they are when they attack her for how she looks, or because she's a mom with 3 kids. You know, imagine that. Somebody who's actually a mom trying to raise their family, having a job of responsibility. What a terrible thing that is. You know, and I just, the only thing that disappoints me is that people haven't figured out that she needs to be a U.S. Senator.
Wow. Well, you know, the chapter's not over yet.
No, it isn't. As soon as she's ready to leave that job, she needs to go become a U.S. Senator from wherever she lives, because I think she would be phenomenal there.
I think she'll have a lot of offers in a lot of different areas. So I think you hit on something really good there. You know, before we're getting close to closing our interview, but one thing I wanted to ask you that I thought was interesting, because you were on the presidential transition team for President Trump, and was that through the Department of Labor?
I was appointed to be on the Labor Department transition team, but it was part of the overall team. So we kind of were on the same bullpen, but we were focused on Labor Department.
Okay, because you were on the transition team, I wanted to ask a question that I think a lot of the viewers are wondering as well. One of the things that was very exciting about for us about President Trump's win was that we had an anticipation that people who were pro the Trump agenda, the campaign promises that were about America first, economic nationalism and all that all those people who obviously were part of the campaign because they came forward to volunteer and work and be part of getting him to the White House, we had a lot of optimism that those people would make it into the agencies and the administration. I wrote a paper several months ago because I was in a volunteer situation and I saw the skeleton crew internally. And when I questioned it, I was told that they were operating, they just couldn't find people. And so what I said to them, are you kidding? the website greatagain.gov was set up after the president won, and it was for people to go and apply. And I was told that website, that database, was lost accidentally. So I wrote an article called "Trump Supporters Need Not Apply." And then from that article, Rick, I started getting a lot of people anonymously contacting me through the agencies, all the federal agencies, saying, hey, I worked on the Trump campaign. I'm a loyalist. I got in here for this job. But guess what? My bosses are all Obama holdovers. They're all establishment appointees, and they're trying to get rid of us. So I wrote another article, Trump loyalists, you're fired. Because to bring, that whole apprentice thing, to call attention to the fact that Trump loyalists were getting purged, just like they were getting purged, from the NSC and other agencies and things like that. So, I mean, what's your thought about, you were part of the transition team, you must have had the same optimism, and why can we not overcome the fact that we are being beaten up a little bit internally, and so is the president, by these Obama holdovers, I call them?
Now, let me give you a three-point answer to that.
Okay.
It's a really serious question. I think it is the one fundamental failing of President Trump, is that he has failed to put his people in place to try to impact his agenda throughout the agencies. There's three reasons why that's occurred. Number one, Steve Bannon said after he left the White House that one of his great regrets is he made a deal on day one that they were going to try to get the establishment to trick the establishment into taking the Trump agenda and moving forward. And it was the deal he made with Priebus in terms of hiring the establishment and hoping that then they would be able to kind of win them over to do because of the allure of power. Instead, the establishment guys took the jobs in order to try to rein in Trump. That was reported in the New York Times, that many of them were quoted, mostly NSC officials, quoted saying their whole reason they were there was because they wanted to rein in Trump. So that's actually boomeranged on the president. It was a bad decision. Second thing is, the president is a guy who doesn't understand. I truly believe he does not understand that you need all 4,000 of your political appointees to be in place in order to rein in this giant behemoth of a government, the 2 million employees. Because what's happening is you have these contracts being let, and there's nobody looking over the bureaucrats' shoulders. And so they're letting some of these contracts to the very same Obama supporters who were getting them under Obama. So you have that kind of problem going on, where the money is still flowing out to fund the left in the Trump administration because the people aren't in place, the Trump supporters aren't in place to stop it. And that's a mistake. And every time he talks about how he's saving money by not having 2,000 employees, political appointees don't have to be approved by the Senate, who he could just put into place. Every time they talk about saving money on that, I cringe, because it's costing billions upon billions of dollars, and it's costing his agenda, because we're basically funding those who are trying to defeat his agenda every single day. So those are a couple things. The third thing is he put the wrong people in place of his personnel department. He put people who are going to put establishment Republicans in place. Reince Priebus put a bunch of RNC people in charge, people who were planning for Trump's defeat 2 weeks before the election even occurred. So these were not people who were busting their tails to elect Trump. They didn't believe Trump could win, and they didn't think he should win. They were planning on how to get the next guy elected in 2020. And and Priebus was too. So by making that decision, he ended up putting in a bunch of people who actively were opposing Trump or were sitting on their hands for Trump. And those are the people who got jobs. And that sends a terrible message to anybody in the political world, because people like me, and I had an opportunity to go in, I decided I could do more on the outside than inside. So this isn't bitterness. I said no for good reason. But, people like me who sat there, and if Trump had lost, we would have been destroyed politically in this town. And people like me who wanted to go in, who would have taken a job, said we're not given that opportunity, or we're given a short opportunity, and then we're said thanks but no thanks downstream. So this is the wrong way. It's the first time in history that the people who supported the president ended up not getting the spoils, if you want to put it that way.
And if that was calculated, that was an incredible coup. You were describing what Bannon called the original sin.
Yeah, it was a mistake. I think they made a grievous mistake because they underestimated how deep the swamp ran and how it was bipartisan in nature. And through that underestimation, they effectively fed the swamp. Now, let me say this. President Trump, every time he makes a decision, is making the right decision to clean the swamp. Not every time, maybe too strong, but most of the time, he's making the right decision. And so those people surrounding him aren't getting in the way of that decision, but implementing it is slowed down because people who don't believe in that decision are the ones who have to do it. And there's a lot of people who are basically just biding time and trying to kill the clock and hoping that they can get to 2020 and make it so they can end the Trump administration in November of 2020 without having to do anything that President Trump says.
And to that point, and we'll get close to closing now, but to that point, what can he do about it? It's just there's still so much gatekeeping, swamp gatekeeping. What?
Well, if it were me, I'll tell you exactly what I'd do if I were President Trump. They've got a budget bill that's coming up right now. I would give the department heads the power to. I'd put a 5% cut RIF of employees into the budget. I'd fight like crazy for that, and give the department heads the ability to determine who should be cut. And then you'd be able to get rid of the most egregious examples of people who were stonewalling the president, who are running the resist movement on taxpayer dollar, and be able to get rid of those people. Now that would be perceived as being radical in DC, but unless the president's people get a chance to actually implement their policy and get rid of those who are getting in the way, then they will. It's designed to fail. Yeah. Second thing, he's got to get all of the political appointees made. Even if he doesn't get the perfect choice, he needs to get choices into place so those people can rein in the money that's flowing out to the left-wing groups. They have to do that. That's something that should be job one, and they could do it tomorrow.
I hope he is aware of that, or maybe if he gets wind of some of this information and your discussion and maybe your writings, I hope that he gets informed on that so that he can, and there's so much in there for him to manage. But it is crippling his agenda to a great extent.
And Jane, you just look at the decision on the transsexuals in the military, and you sit there and you say the president says we're not going to do that, and yet the Defense Department says, oh well, we're going to do it anyway. On January 1. It turns out that people didn't file filings they were supposed to file in court, and it was all done because you don't have people in place who are downstream at the fourth level of government to be able to get these things done. And it's a big job. And that's why you have so many people working long hours to make it happen. Obama had his people in place working those long hours. Obama still has his people in place working those long hours. And now we need to get Trump's people in place so we can at least get 3 years of the first term of Donald Trump to work.
And Obama also had the establishment GOP, who are still his holdovers. I think Ryan and McConnell are two of his biggest holdovers, but that's just Dr. Jane's opinion. So anyway, Rick, tell people once again how they can find you. Your website, whatever your social media is. Let's get that out. So
go to getliberty.org. It's GET Liberty LIBERTY.org. And on Twitter it's @limit GOVT, @limit GOVT, and you'll get all of our stuff. And I'd encourage anybody to subscribe onto the site because you'll get unique articles from us, you'll get unique perspectives, and you'll really get the truth of what's going on. And sometimes you're going to disagree. You can get on there. You can tell us you disagree. It's fine with us. We're going to tell it like it is. We're not influenced by anybody, and we're not exactly well liked at the speaker's office and others because, quite honestly, they don't have anything we want.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think a lot of our viewers, based on their comments, are really interested in a lot of what you've written and what you've had to say, and they've already read some of them have already read your stuff. So I highly encourage those who haven't to really check out the website and keep watching for your articles. Is there a book, a Manning book coming out anytime soon on these issues?
Well, that's a great question. I'm actually talking to somebody about doing something like that, but I don't have any great big announcements I can make today. But yeah, we're talking about that. But I'll be honest. My job is to sit there and every single day fight like crazy to try to stop this administrative state. And as I think about the massive undertaking, as you know, of doing a book, anything that would detract from being in the daily battle and basically, running into picture this scene from Gladiator where they're running together in the field and, with the various weapons hitting each other. Anything would detract from the fun of doing that to the enemies of the state would somewhat be a waste of my time. So I'm looking at a book, but if it's going to detract from fighting the war, I'm not going to do it.
Sure. I hear you on that. Well, again, on behalf of Cernovich Media and Dr. Janes, DC, I do want to thank you again for being our guest tonight. It's been fascinating, and you've really gotten us into a little bit of a deep dive in some of these topics and really broadened our understanding of them. So thank you so much again. I hope you'll come back in the not too distant future and chat with us. It'll be great fun.
Absolutely, Jane. Anytime you need me.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick. And I'm going to sign off to the viewers and just remind you that Dr. Janes, DC is here every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Almost all of the time we are live, and when we can't, we'll still be on at 7 o'clock. I do want to remind everyone and to pick up a copy for Christmas of Dr. Jane Ruby. I wrote a book called A Sea of New Media. In the book, I do talk about some of the things that Rick and I talked about tonight, which is that all of you are carrying around a very powerful tool in your purse or your pocket every single day. Do not underestimate the ability of that tool to bring more truth and overcome. As Andrew Breitbart, it comes from Andrew Breitbart's speech on the National Mall back in 2010, where he said to people about their cell phones, now you are a sea of new media to capture the lies. We do have a lot of options to try to push back on the fake media. So thank you to the viewers. You guys had great comments and questions. I'm going to review them again. And I hope you loved hearing Rick Manning tonight. We're going to definitely have him back. He's a great guest. So thanks again to everyone. And thanks to my wonderful producer, Tom Shadowley, I just couldn't do it without you, buddy. Good night, everybody. Dr. Janes, DC, signing off.